As anyone who was around before the modern age of the internet will tell you, there was a time before viral videos and a constant stream of information when all people had to work off of were urban legends, stories around a water cooler, and sensationalist headlines, and Nokia phones that let you play Snake. But because continuous information wasn't as readily available, some stories or headlines would spread across county lines, state lines, even oceans. From dinner parties to school hallways, people would whisper stories about the kid who died from drinking Coca-Cola and eating Pop Rocks, or how flashing your high beams at a car with their lights off will get you killed by a gang member, or that Marilyn Manson surgically removed his bottom rib so that he could, you know. One good story would go a lot further than it could today. But even if you weren't alive yet in the 90s or were too young to remember it like I was, there's another story from that era that has persisted throughout the decades. And it goes something like this. Stop me if you've heard it. A woman spills a cup of McDonald's coffee on herself, sues McDonald's because the coffee was a little hot, and is awarded millions and millions of dollars by the court. I feel like as a kid, nearly every time I was in a drive-thru, someone would repeat this story. Normally my parents would say something like, "Oh, that coffee's certainly hot, make sure you don't spill it." You know, one woman spilled some on her and managed to sue McDonald's and got a bunch of money. I'm sure we've all heard it to some degree. And while the gist of the story regarding the spilled coffee is mostly true, the details painted a more complete picture. And unfortunately, those details, especially when this story first emerged in 1992, were mostly lost in the mainstream narrative. And while in recent years there's been some attention given to the true story behind the headlines, for years the prevailing thought for most people was the same as when the story first broke. That this was nothing more than a frivolous lawsuit from a clumsy and litigious woman who was clearly gaming the system. After all, millions of people around the world successfully drink their coffee every morning without spilling it on themselves, so why should she get special treatment and a 7-figure payout? Even worse, many believe this case in particular was responsible for kickstarting a new era of frivolous litigations in America. This included a man suing Michael Jordan for the emotional distress caused by having the same name as him, a judge suing his dry cleaner $67 million for misplacing a pair of slacks, and a convicted criminal who sued himself for violating his own civil rights. I've got to talk about that guy one day. But the true story of the McDonald's coffee lawsuit may not be as ridiculous as you initially thought, and sadly, may prove to be all the more tragic. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. The term fake news might be a newer concept, at least the phrase being used as much as it is now. But actual fake news, as regulars of the channel probably know by now, is hardly new. For example, this AP headline from 1993 claims, quote, "Coffee too hot, jury agrees with burn victim." While sure, I guess it's technically true, the headline hardly conveys the whole truth and downplays the severity of the incident. But of course, that didn't stop the story from spreading. Not to say it's entirely the AP's fault, it's just one of many publications that has some part of the blame. And unfortunately, this didn't stop Stella Liebeck from becoming the new face of American greed. All while a multinational corporation worth billions of dollars was made out to be the victim of a pandering justice system. This story is less about clumsy hands than it is about corporate negligence. But we'll get there in a bit. But first, we need to establish some more stuff around this case. Let's start with coffee. If you're not a coffee drinker, then you're in the minority. 70% of America, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I'm literally drinking coffee. As I read that line, I didn't even process that. Well, so yeah. Get on board. 70% of American adults have coffee at least once a day in some form or another, and a cup of coffee has one of the highest profit margins of any item on a food menu. So if you're a restaurant who serves breakfast like McDonald's, it would be smart business to capitalize on that. And nowadays, if you walk into any establishment that is vaguely breakfast related, you will be assaulted with a menu that would kill a pilgrim. Lattes, cortados, mochas, macchiatos, cold brews, cold foams, vanilla, lavender, whipped, frozen.
You can barbecue it, boil it, broil it, bake it, saute it.
Anything you can imagine. But these options weren't really prevalent until the 2000s, after the Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz introduced the world at large to the Frappuccino. In the 90s, and definitely in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was really only one way you took a cup of coffee. Hot and from a pot, potentially with cream or sugar. And this was exactly how McDonald's brewed and served theirs, which is all Stella Liebeck wanted. A cup of reasonably hot coffee, along with some cream and sugar. Unfortunately, that's not how the world saw it. The story that millions of Americans heard from the news and their neighbors was that Miss Liebeck was driving, balancing a fresh cup of McDonald's coffee between her legs. She spilled the cup, and it burned her lap a little. And then she used this as an excuse to once again sue for millions of dollars. So, let's talk about what actually happened. With our first mistake in the narrative that most people believe, the idea that she was driving. In reality, Stella Liebeck was in the passenger seat of her grandson Cristiano's Ford Probe. Good grandson that he was, Chris had planned to chauffeur his grandma around for the day, helping her run errands. Keep in mind that Stella Liebeck was 79 years old. Their first stop was McDonald's to get their day started off, as you can imagine, with a cup of coffee. One detail about the narrative everyone believes that is true is that she was holding the cup of coffee between her legs. This is true on its own, but again, she wasn't driving, so it's not like she was balancing it between her legs with her hands on the wheel, being reckless. She was holding it in between her legs because her grandson's car didn't have a cup holder. They pulled up to the drive-thru window. Stella paid her 49 cents in exchange for a cup of black coffee. Man, 49 cents. Wow. Asked for a couple cream and sugar packets, and they pulled into a parking spot so Stella could fix her coffee just how she wanted. And when she went to open the lid, the cup spilled onto her lap, soaking into her cotton sweatpants and all over her lap and legs. And instead of going on their morning errands, her grandson Chris had to rush Stella Liebeck to the emergency room. Which brings us to the biggest problem with the narrative most people believe, that the cup of coffee burned her lap a little. When in reality, have you ever seen a skin graft procedure? I have, but I wouldn't recommend it for the faint of heart. A skin graft involves clipping or shaving a large patch of your own skin with what looks like an old school safety razor, basically down to the roots of your skin, so that when you lay it over the part of your body that needs it, it can have a chance to grow back. Imagine moving a section of grass to a dirt patch, except very bloody and skin colored. It's not a superficial procedure. Well, I can tell you that that cup of coffee was so hot that Stella Liebeck needed several of these immediately following the spill, due to the numerous second and even third-degree burns she sustained from the coffee. It was so bad that she went into shock, had to spend 8 days in the hospital, and lost 20 pounds. She spent the next 2 years in and out of various medical treatments, and her skin was permanently disfigured, all thanks to a 49-cent cup of McDonald's coffee. Imagine how hot that liquid needed to be in order to cause that. Well, actually, you don't have to imagine, because that's what I'm here for. Short version, it was really hot. According to the McDonald's employee manual, employees, who I remind you are not trained chefs nor scientists, were required to brew the coffee between 195 and 205 degrees in order to extract the optimal coffee flavor, then hold that coffee between 180 and 190 degrees. Again, just for context, the maximum temperature something like a jacuzzi is allowed to go to is around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And yeah, I know a lot of you sick freaks like me want the hot tub to be even hotter and just make it as hot as possible, and you should be locked up in a cage, preferably one with a jacuzzi. Or how about this? The hottest that your hot water gets in your kitchen faucet should be about 120 degrees. Soup in a restaurant is served at a maximum of around 160 degrees. And just so we keep context here, water boils at 212 degrees, or just a few degrees above the maximum threshold that McDonald's employees were supposed to brew their coffee at. So let's say that the employees made a mistake and brewed a pot of coffee a little hotter than usual, like a few percent too hot. Or they kept it heated a few more degrees past the 190 degree threshold. And let's say that Stella Liebeck was given the freshest cup from the freshest batch they had that morning. Given all of that, it is extremely possible that the cup the employee handed her was filled with a liquid in excess of 200 degrees. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think restaurant employees, especially ones who are underpaid, and many who were at the time working for a minimum wage of well under $4 an hour, should have the responsibility of trying not to scald old grandmas with boiling hot bean water while trying to get orders made and served as quickly as possible to a drive-thru full of people. And to be clear, I'm not diminishing anyone who works at this job, let alone restaurant workers. My point is that there is a reasonable expectation of responsibility for people in dangerous jobs. And pretty much always, those jobs are compensated with higher wages to go along with that responsibility. But if you're not going to pay people the reasonable wage for a job that is now handing dangerous materials to people out of a drive-thru window or give them the proper training, it's not really fair to pay someone minimum wage and then expect them to manage a dangerous position that the corporate office put them in to begin with. And of course, the most important part of this entire story, the 79-year-old woman who had third-degree burns went into shock and had to be in and out of the hospital getting procedures for the next 2 years. Roughly $11,000 later, Stella Liebeck was out of the hospital. Her daughter had to take time off work to tend to her mother, so with the help of her son-in-law, Stella wrote to McDonald's corporate asking for two things. One, compensation for her medical bills and lost wages for her daughter. This was for the sum of $20,000. And two, more of a question than a request. Stella wanted to know if the coffee machine at this Albuquerque location was defective. In the letter she wrote, quote, "Your machine must be too hot, so look at it and fix it if it's broken. It must be an aberration," end quote. So all she wanted was them to fix the coffee machine if it was broken, because surely it had to be, and $20,000 for, again, multiple skin grafts and what would end up being 2 years in a hospital. And again, only $20,000 for what turned out to be multiple burns and medical procedures. All sounds perfectly reasonable to me. But you can probably guess how the multinational corporation worth almost $10 billion at the time responded to Stella's request. No counteroffer, no apology. If your last name is McDonald and you're watching this, you might be thinking, $20,000. She spilled it on herself. It's her fault. And it's a one-off, a freak accident. Why is my dad's restaurant responsible if you are specifically the McDonald who is the child of the original McDonald, but the guy who started the McDonald chain isn't even McDonald. He bought the name off of McDonald. So if you're also that guy's son / daughter / child, I guess you'd ask that. Sounded better in my head. I mean, she even said it herself. Quote, "It must be an aberration." Well, it actually wasn't an aberration. Between 1982 and 1992, in the 10 years leading up to the incident, McDonald's had 700, that is 7 and 2 zeros, claims brought against them from customers being burned by their coffee. Not all of them resulted in third-degree burns. Not all of them happened to 79-year-old women, but more than a few definitely did. So not only was this woman, who a lot of people think as just some grifter who was trying to get money from a big company, not only was the injury way worse than most people think, but there was also a precedence for it. I would like to point to a 1992 McDonald's commercial which posed the question for both its customers and employees: what's the best thing about McDonald's breakfast?
Take one and action. Hey, what's the best thing about breakfast at McDonald's?
Coffee.
Pour it out of the cup, it's steaming, it's dark and rich.
I pour it personally.
Coffee fresh?
Fresh brewed. Fantastic cup of coffee.
So what's the secret?
Arabica.
Oh, what's an Arabica?
Arabica beans.
Oh, the beans. And what else?
It's always fresh.
It just tastes good.
And they like to come in and talk with each other, and just like the small coffee shop long ago.
How much a coffee refill?
You're free. What you want is what you get.
Guaranteed.
What's up?
Yeah.
Obviously, the correct answer is the bacon, egg, and cheese McGriddle, so there's clearly propaganda at play. With coffee's high profit margin, McDonald's wanted to push their coffee, so everyone and their mom, a paid actress in the commercial by the way, answered the question the same way. The coffee, of course. And nearly every shot in the ad features a cloud of hot steam emanating from a pot or cup in the hands of smiling customers or employees. The commercial really wants you to know that their coffee is fresh, fresh brewed, and always fresh, which means hot. And they were perfectly okay with it. In fact, their track record of scalding coffee had already cost them over $500,000 up to this point. Again, 700 people, that's a lot of settlements, including a settlement of $27,500 to a woman in Houston who suffered third-degree burns 6 years earlier. So Stella asking for $20,000 was not egregious or unheard of. In fact, it was shockingly reasonable considering the precedent that had been well established already. But McDonald's didn't choose reasonable. They chose a battle that Stella Liebeck was willing to fight. So for help, considering McDonald's was not willing to pay her medical bills that they certainly caused. Again, why does anyone need to be handed a 200-degree cup? My word. So for help, she turned to the very same lawyer who had previously helped the woman in Houston. His name was Reed Morgan. And that makes sense, right? This woman has third-degree burns, so go to the attorney who previously got money out of McDonald's for another woman that had third-degree burns. Before a suit was filed, Reed Morgan suggested McDonald's compensate Stella $90,000 to cover her medical bills, along with pain and suffering. Again, if McDonald's would have just responded to the first letter, they could have paid $20,000 for all of this to go away, but didn't want to play ball, so now the price was $90,000. Once again, however, McDonald's didn't want to cooperate. Their counteroffer, $800.28. I'm not kidding. They said, we hear you with like 20,000. Now you want 90,000. Best we can do, 800. And hear me out, 28 cents. Almost to another cup of coffee. It would have been less insulting if they just sent a letter that said no. Like no address or anything, just the word no. That would be more respectful. I think it's also important to note that Stella Liebeck had never filed a lawsuit in her life. She was not, nor did she want to be, a litigious person. The entire narrative around her being a predatory person who is trying to pull a slip and fall stunt to get money out of a business has absolutely no validation. She was 79 years old, was severely hurt, and now is looking for an attorney. At a certain point, you have to decide if you want to stand up and fight or let someone bigger, richer, and more powerful than you kick you to the curb. And then in the case of McDonald's, laugh at you for offering $800.28. So in 1993, Stella, with help from Reed Morgan, filed a lawsuit against McDonald's for gross negligence, stating that they knowingly sold coffee that was unreasonably hot, dangerous, and without adequate warning as such. She sought both compensatory and punitive damages. Compensatory for the medical bills and pain and suffering, and punitive as punishment to McDonald's for serving freshly brewed coffee that is actually just scalding hot, despite being aware of the inherent dangers it presented. Once again, they had 700 other cases as precedents. Leading up to the trial, Stella attempted to settle twice. First, for $300,000, which again, if my grandmother was burned by a company's coffee, I'd be gunning for him far more. I think 300,000 is reasonable. Then again, on the night before the trial, after a neutral mediator recommended that both parties settle for $225,000, both times McDonald's declined. So, trial was on. For 7 days, a jury saw and heard evidence and listened to expert and witness testimony. Going into the trial, Stella was already facing the same scrutiny that she would later receive from the general public. In fact, the jury foreman said he, quote, wasn't convinced as to why I needed to be there to settle a coffee spill, end quote, before the trial started. But this case did not go well for McDonald's almost immediately. McDonald's argued that Stella was at fault, or as they put it, she was the proximate cause of the injury by placing the coffee between her legs and not removing clothing immediately after the spill. Yes, I am not kidding. McDonald's argument is that the first thing a 79-year-old woman should be expected to do in public in her grandson's car when her legs are being scalded by boiling hot water that's soaking into her sweatpants is to get naked in front of her grandson, as well as everyone else at McDonald's, from the cramped passenger seat of a Ford Probe. And part of the injuries was her fault for not stripping in the parking lot, again assuming she had the physical capability to even do that. Then, McDonald's took it a step further, saying that her advanced age contributed to the severe nature of her burns because her old skin makes her more vulnerable to serious injuries. And somehow, that is her fault. Unfortunately for McDonald's, there is not a sign on the door, coffee cup, or menu that says anyone over the age of 78 should dine at their own risk. I once heard a law professor say that there are two types of plaintiffs you always settle with: babies and the elderly, because those are the two kind of plaintiffs that always win, but the McDonald's attorneys clearly had not heard that advice. Of those 700 previously mentioned victims of McDonald's coffee burns, babies and children were also hurt. And in some cases, it was the McDonald's employee who accidentally spilled on a customer either in the store or through the drive-thru window. While initially the jurors were kind of on the fence prior to the trial, hearing that there were 700 known incidents of this happening in the past and McDonald's has done nothing is a hard number to ignore. One interesting fact that came up during the trial was that not all coffee shops feel the need to brew their coffee at 200 degrees to extract optimal coffee flavor. What a unique thought. You can just use lower temperatures. Part of McDonald's defense was, well, everyone else brews it that hot, so that's why we brew it that hot. But you can just use lower temperatures. Or here's an absolutely crazy idea. Maybe let the coffee cool or hold it for a second or do something before you hand it straight to them. They don't need to funnel it from the machine into their mouth. It can wait. A thermodynamics expert testified that liquids at 190 degrees Fahrenheit can cause third-degree burns in 2 to 3 seconds, and almost always require a skin graft procedure or debridement, the process where you have to remove all the damaged tissue from your dead skin. At 180 degrees, third-degree burns set in at 12 to 15 seconds, and at 160 degrees, 20 seconds. Stella, again, an almost 80-year-old woman, probably had 3 to 5 seconds to take off her pants while seated in a small car while probably wearing a seatbelt. That's if she does everything perfectly and optimally in the seconds that McDonald's said she should have reacted. Even then, at the temperature they were serving their coffee, it would still be too late. You know how when you have your coffee pot at home after the coffee's brewed, it's just kept hot on the burner? Well, on an at-home coffee pot, this is typically around 140 degrees. So if McDonald's had kept their coffee at the 140 degrees that a standard at-home coffee pot would, she would have had some time to react and respond, and the damage wouldn't have been as severe. Again, even if your argument is you need to brew it at that temperature, you don't have to serve it at that temperature. Instead, Stella's doctor testified that she incurred one of the worst scalding burns he'd ever seen. And through some pretty graphic photos, the jury saw proof. Reed Morgan had a McDonald's quality assurance manager take the stand. Chris Appleton, the very same quality assurance manager who testified 6 years prior in the Houston incident. Appleton was asked if, in the 6 years since the Houston lawsuit, McDonald's or anyone within the company had investigated the razor-thin window of time a person has to react to spills, given the temperatures they serve their coffee at. His answer, quote, "No, we have not." You know, for a fast food place who seems to always have their ice cream machine down, it's a shame that their grandma burning juice machine works just fine. Even after all those prior incidents, McDonald's refused to change its corporate policy and serve its coffee at a safer temperature. They said they are, quote, aware of the risk with, quote, no plans to turn down the heat. Appleton also stated that there are more serious dangers in restaurants to worry about, which is a very stupid thing to say. Like, yeah, if the restaurant's fridge goes down and everyone gets food poisoning or something, or if there's like a contaminant in the food, you're right, that would be a bigger problem. That does not change the current problem of the super hot scalding thing you're serving to people that has burned 701 of them now. And also, are you implying that those problems are there? Are you saying like, oh, you guys think the coffee's bad? You've got no clue what's going on at most of these places. Even if there's other things you have to think about, you still have to think about the super hot liquid that you are encouraging people to put in their mouth. You physically cannot drink something served at that temperature without physically hurting yourself. And that's what the lawyers wanted to know. When asked if swallowing a cup of coffee brewed to the standards explicitly laid out in the McDonald's handbook is hazardous to the mouth, tongue, throat, and esophagus, Appleton's response was yes. If they could get the coffee in their throat, it would scald someone. Even though McDonald's knew its coffee was dangerous, their market research found that their customers want hot coffee, they want it steamy hot, and they expect to get it that way. Which, for one, see the commercial I showed earlier where all the coffee's like comedically hot. Again, they're happy to rely on that marketing when it makes them money, but in court, not so much. But also, this is like comedically evil business strategy. A company is now being pinned for doing something reckless because it sells better, and then when asked why they did it, they just pass the blame off to nameless customers. Almost as to say, well, you people want it this way, and you keep buying it, so it's really your fault. McDonald's stance is, the customers know the risks they're taking when they drink coffee. But also, obviously not. Like, sure, people want hot coffee. I like hot coffee. This is hot. I like hot coffee. It's not 200 degrees hot, but it's hot. And a lot of people do stuff like they'll get their coffee and then they'll sit and eat their food and they'll let it cool for too long. And then by the time they drink it, it's kind of cool. So then they complain that the coffee should be hotter. Or maybe the cups are doing a bad job at insulating the heat so the coffee gets cooler than people expected. But none of those things are an excuse to give someone a drink that is just below boiling temp. No one should be handed a beverage that will cause, I cannot stress this enough, shock and third-degree burns. Imagine if I was bringing you food and when I brought it to your table, the entire plate was on fire. And you're like, this is far too hot. And I'm like, yeah, but it won't be later. Another interesting thing from this trial is the revelation that McDonald's has something called a human factors engineer. And this person identified as a human factors engineer, at the time, Dr. P. Robert Naff, took the stand and testified that McDonald's knew of the previous incidents and are aware of future incidents. Which, for one, crazy statement. Not only are we aware of the things we've done wrong in the past, but we can assure you we will do it again in the future. But even after seeing the horrific photos of Stella's injuries, Naff took the stand and said these burns are, quote, statistically insignificant compared to the billions of cups of coffee they sell every year. You hear that, Grandma? You are a statistic improbability. This is not a matter of statistics. It's not like car wrecks, where the number of people who die in car accidents is so minor compared to the number of people that don't, that cars are still the most effective means of transportation. This is the product you are serving will burn people 100% of the time, and you're just banking on it not touching them for a few minutes. after you hand it to them. Imagine if you went to a car lot, but if you got in the car within 10 minutes of purchasing it, the car will explode. So every car lot in the world has like a safe distance you can be upon buying it, because if you get too close to the car, you will die. That is a closer equivalency to the McDonald's thing. It would be like if car manufacturers said, yeah, well, the number of people that blow up in the first 10 minutes is statistically insignificant compared to the number of people who don't. The better question would be, can you just make the cars not explode? Do you have to put the bomb in them? I like my car just fine without the bomb, the 10-minute bomb. Just give it to me that way. Or like, just give me cars that are 10 minutes old. That's fine. What this statistically insignificant phrase translates to is that until enough people who burn themselves start suing us for it, we make more money serving our coffee the way some focus groups say we should, then we lose on legal fees. And in case you think I'm exaggerating, there was this exchange between Reed Morgan and Chris Appleton. Quote from Mr. Morgan, "So a fair way to assess your reasoning is, a few people are being seriously burned, requiring hospitalization, but out of the billions of cups of coffee we sell, there's not been enough burn to where we need to stop selling it that hot." Appleton's reply, "There's a very low probability of an accident. We know that the customers want the product hot, so we're at this time continuing with our current practice." Morgan, "Do you know how McDonald's Corporation informs itself of the severity of the burns that are recorded?" Appleton, "I'm not intimately familiar with the process. I believe it's handled through our insurance company." Morgan, "So for you to say that you haven't formulated a conclusion that there have been enough severe burns to warrant turning down the temperature on your coffee, you are speaking without knowledge of the extent and severity. Is that right?" Appleton, "I think that. I don't think we have a good measure on the severity of each of these." Morgan, "Well, I'm curious because I've shown you recordations." Recordations? It sounds like something I'd say. Imagine he tried to say records and recommendations. Said recordations. You know what? Actually, I like that word. Recordations. Of some 700 people here that have been burned. Obviously, to you, 700 people burned is not a significantly high enough number to turn down the heat. Do you have in mind a number of how many people would have to be burned for you to become so concerned that you would insist that burn specialists be consulted and something be done to sell this coffee at a lower temperature? Appleton's response, "No, I don't have a number in mind." So yeah, like I said, until the temperature of their coffee costs them more money in legal fees than it's worth, they're just gonna keep doing that. Defense attorney Terry McGee used her closing arguments to double down on this stance. She said on McDonald's behalf that Stella was to blame and unwise to put the cup between her knees. Again, see the exploding car analogy I made earlier. You are the ones that gave me the exploding car. She also said that the 79-year-old woman failed to jump out of the car within the 3-second window after the spill. In her closing argument, McGee said, quote, "The real question is how far you want society to go to restrict what most of us enjoy and accept. Let the people have their exploding cars." Oh, what? The government's gonna come tell me I can't get into my exploding car? I guess this is Obama's America in action. Back in my dad's age, a man could blow up in his car if he wanted to. You know those Ford truck commercials where it's like, bow, 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 and it's like the power of the Ford F-150. It's one of those commercials, but it's just about dying in a car bomb. Like the guitar is playing, it's like, bow, 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 and it's like, the start of the commercial is like, back when men could be men, back when the Wild West was wide open, and it's just a cowboy getting into a truck and it blows, and the narrator's like, "That's the power of the F-150. Oh. To her whole comment about how far are we going to go to restrict society from things that they enjoy, look, I love Tostino's pizza rolls. I do not like burning my tongue on pizza rolls. I absolutely do not enjoy scalding my esophagus with a cheap cup of coffee. At least with pizza rolls, you can do like the bite off the corner and blow on it thing. With McDonald's, you just have to get third-degree burns and then take them to court, I guess. So it seems McDonald's was guilty of two things. The first is being completely out of touch, and the second came after the jury deliberated. They came to the verdict that McDonald's was liable for Stella Liebeck's injuries on the claims of a defective product, among other things. Judge Robert Scott, who presided over the trial, had this to say, quote, The written transcript is not going to reveal the attitudes of corporate indifference presented by demeanor or of the witnesses for the defendant McDonald's, as well as their employees. But the jury was exposed to it, and I think that they properly considered it in their deliberation. During the trial, McDonald's expressed zero desire to apologize, print a warning, or make their coffee just a little bit less hot. And everyone except for the defense seemed to realize that. One juror went on the record as saying, quote, "There was a person behind every number of the 700 injured, and I don't think the corporation was attaching enough importance to that." Stella was awarded $200,000 for compensatory damages and $2.7 million for punitive damages. That number was calculated based off the revenue McDonald's made at the time from coffee sales alone in 2 days. No wonder McDonald's didn't care about the 700 lawsuits. You're making $2.7 million in 48 hours off of just the coffee. So they figured that money should go to someone that was affected by it. But a judge later reduced the total awarded to just $640,000, which is still a lot of money, but not compared to $2.7 million. And in the end, Stella and McDonald's settled out of court, likely to prevent appeals and for Stella to sign a non-disclosure. Because McDonald's and their attorneys could have kept this thing going in court forever. But sadly, that means that Stella probably ended up with quite a bit less than that. Somewhere between $200,000 and $640,000. So, as established, the story of a woman looking to sue McDonald's so she accidentally spilled coffee on her lap to get millions of dollars isn't everything you thought it was. Or probably thought it was. I don't know you. It was an elderly woman who was handed a quite reckless cup of coffee, and initially only asked for $20,000, eventually going all the way up to $300,000, until this became a huge court process, and then the punitive damages, which was the figure that got up to 7 figures, came from McDonald's coffee sales, and even then, that amount wasn't awarded. At the end of the day, though, the media is going to media. Right off the bat, no one talked about the fact that Judge Scott ordered mediation and that Stella ended up walking away with significantly less than the $2.7 million she was awarded. Even worse, in addition to the physical trauma her body endured and the emotional toll of a long trial and many hospital visits, the story made international headlines. Like I said at the beginning, the media continued watering down the story and then changed the story and then editorialized even that. So is it potentially possible that McDonald's, the big giant PR machine that was really worried about any of these cases becoming too popular, might have potentially kind of maybe, I don't know, had a hand in that somehow? Maybe. Who knows? PBS would later categorize coverage of the story by saying, quote, "As the story's reach got bigger, its word count got smaller." And I really can't think of a better way to put it. The original reporting of the story was 700 words in an Albuquerque newspaper. That was reduced to 350 words in the Associated Press and as little as 50 words in other publications. Hard to convey the full extent of the incident that we've talked about up until this point, trial and corporate indifferences, in 50 words. That is, of course, unless you just change the story to "Woman sues McDonald's over spilled coffee." Local and national outlets, without looking at the actual facts, began to report the story incorrectly. Some guy in a suit in a government building told viewers on C-SPAN that Stella held the cup of coffee between her legs while she was driving. ABC labeled Stella, quote, "the poster child of excessive lawsuits." Yes, a 79-year-old woman with third-degree burns. Absolutely excessive. Stella became a villain. She received letters of outrage, verbal abuse, and humiliation. Daytime talk shows gave guest and audience members with no knowledge of the case a platform to comment on the incident, many of whom leaned on the side of McDonald's. She became the butt of jokes. A man named Randy Cassingham created something called the Stella Awards, given to the most bogus lawsuits of the year. Craig Ferguson and Jay Leno made jokes about it on national TV. In Toby Keith's song American Ride, one of the lyrics is, "Spill a cup of coffee, make $1 million," citing her lawsuit as a symptom of an epidemic in lost common sense. Weird Al has a song called "I'll Sue Ya" that references this case as once again a frivolous lawsuit. Even Seinfeld wrote an entire storyline in which Kramer spills coffee on himself and goes to lawyer Jackie Childs, who tells him if there's at least one coffee drinker on the jury, Kramer will walk out of the courtroom a rich man. As all of this was happening, Stella remained silent. Because she almost certainly signed an NDA, she legally could not tell her side of the story, and by side, I mean the truth. A few years later, after the initial hype died down, Stella became an urban legend. People would spread a version of a version of a version of the true story about the woman who got rich after she tried drinking her coffee while driving and then spilled it. Eventually, everyone knew what had happened. They knew about the case. And it went from a misreported story to just misinformation. 20 years later, in 2013, Stella Liebeck's lawsuit resurfaced in the news once again. This time, a woman in California named Selena Edwards had filed a lawsuit against McDonald's, alleging that she suffered second-degree burns when she received a cup of coffee in the drive-thru whose lid was not fastened correctly. McDonald's settled with her for about $2,000, but insurance officials investigated and found that the photos Edwards submitted to the claim were actually photos taken from a hospital website. So I petitioned the guy that named the fraudulent lawsuit award the Stella Awards to now rename it to the Edward Awards. Edwards was charged with 21 counts of insurance and workers' compensation fraud and pled no contest in order to accept a plea deal. More recently, in 2020, a Postmates driver, who we'll just call Michael to avoid humiliation, was picking up a Starbucks order to drop off. The drive-thru worker handed him 3 medicine ball hot teas in a cardboard drink caddy, one of which did not have the lid properly secured. Michael's attorney was able to obtain surveillance footage of the incident. Within 1.4 seconds after the handoff, one of the venti teas spilled onto Michael's lap and groin, causing severe burns, disfigurement, and debilitating nerve damage to the affected area. His life, as he would testify in court, was forever changed, as he would need multiple skin grafts to his, well, the very last place a man would ever want to get a skin graft. The burns affected his dating life, self-esteem, and caused psychological harm. Unlike McDonald's, in the Liebeck case, Starbucks was likely aware this was going to be a legal problem for them. Before trial even began, they offered Michael $3 million, later raising that amount to $30 million. According to his attorney, he would have taken the settlement if Starbucks apologized and revised its safety procedures to prevent injury to anyone else, but Starbucks refused. The case went to trial in March of 2025, just a few months ago. Starbucks played the exact same blame game on Michael that McDonald's did on Stella, saying it was his fault and diminishing his injuries. In the end, the jury awarded him $50 million, with the vast majority of news coverage mentioning Stella Liebeck by name. Keep in mind, a woman who we don't know how much she got, but it was way less than $50 million. At the very least, McDonald's did eventually amend their handbook, if it took a massive public lawsuit to make them do that. Coffee is now mandated to be brewed 10 degrees lower than before, buying potential victims an extra few seconds to jump out of their grandson's car and rip their clothes off. Stella Liebeck passed away in 2004 at the age of 91, and she never fully recovered from her injuries. True to form, Time magazine couldn't just let her lie. She's mentioned at place number 2 in their top 10 most outrageous lawsuits. And in this article, Time magazine made the very tasteful joke, quote, "Perhaps the most unfortunate part of the crazy clash is that Liebeck didn't live to see the addition of iced coffee to McDonald's menu." Very cool, Time magazine. Thank you. I appreciate you making fun of an old woman who was shamed by multiple media outlets and trillion-dollar conglomerations after getting burned with her grandson and requiring hospital visits for the rest of her life. I like that we are making fun of her. That's so cool. Situations like this, anytime I talk about them, they're always tragic. It's always sad when a situation goes underreported or is misreported and the historical narrative is just wrong or harmful. But as an upside to all of these things, now you know better. So hopefully you knowing better does a little bit more good in the world and does a little bit to help correct the narrative. That is one of the nice things, as much as people like me make jokes about people being too tied into social media or their phones. It is nice now whenever a case happens, we see every angle of it. It's a lot harder for these corporations to hide behind the press. So maybe that's at least some good to go with all the bad I've told you about today. And if nothing else, maybe you can just think of McDonald's being comedically evil and also exploding trucks. I know that made me happy. But regardless, I'm just glad that you're here, and I just want to say thank you for watching. I appreciate your all support so much. It means the world. Got a lot of cool stuff on the way. Finally able to talk about some of the projects I've been setting up, like the Creepcast Patreon. I believe the announcement for that will be up by the time this video goes up, as well as Bellum, the video game I'm working on with creators like Karma Cut and Operator Drewski. More info about these things on Creepcast and on the Ready or Not main channel video. And of course, thank you guys so much for the support you've shown on this. It's cool to put a team together to work on some stuff we're really passionate about and see you guys support and love it so much. It really does mean the world. So that should do it for now. New content on the way, but before I go, we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye! Also, don't serve people coffee at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. What on earth are you thinking?